Hi, this is Pete Lyons with another video on Einstein Analytics, and today we're going to be talking about best practices as it applies to the creation and application of permission sets. So first, let's start with some general guidelines about permission sets. This is really applicable for any time that you're going to be installing any kind of module within Salesforce that is outside of your core implementation, and you're not necessarily going to grant access to every user in the system. Then you're going to want to use a permission set. So the first suggestion that I'm going to make is whenever you find yourself in this situation, you're going to want to create separate permission sets at a minimum for admins and standard users. Standard users are going to have different needs and are not necessarily going to need advanced permissions for deletion, modification, configuration, user access, provisioning, etc. So next, license-based permissions should be considered a separate permission set, particularly your sales service wave licenses. They should have their own permission sets that are separate, and the reason why is for better resource management. If a user does not have a need for Sales Wave, don't give them the license. This is, and by contrast, if a user does not need the platform license and only needs Sales Wave, don't give them the platform license. You're paying per user, per month, per license, so it only makes sense to better manage this resource by giving users only the permission set license that they actually need to use the tool as intended. So how many different permission sets do you actually need? Well, this is going to depend directly on the scale and complexity of your implementation. If you've got 10 users, not a whole lot of custom, I would say just create 2 separate permission sets, have 2 admins with all the perms, and 8 standard users with a much more restrictive list. If you have a complex implementation with 200 plus users across different business units within your company, different access needs, then you're going to want to be a bit more granular. But even still, you shouldn't really need more than 5 or 6 permission sets to govern all the wave. So then the last thing to talk about is bottom-up versus top-down strategy. And this is kind of just a general guiding principle about how to create permission sets. A permission set is an a la carte addition to a profile, uses the exact same editor and all of the same permissions. So really, this is an addition to existing permission granted through the profile. You should always start with the minimum permissions that a user actually needs. And with each additional permission that you want to add, you should ask yourself the question, is there a business need for which I am giving this user this permission? Don't just assign users permissions because you're not sure if they will or will not need it. It is always preferable to get a support ticket for a user that does not have enough access than it is to get a support ticket for cleaning up after a user had too much access and broke the system. So this is a list of the standard permissions that are available currently in the profile and permission set editor that involve Wave Analytics. You might notice I kind of switch back and forth between Einstein and Wave. We're currently in the process of the rebranding. All of these permissions are still listed as Wave permissions in the editor, so that's why I'm calling them that. My personal preference is I do like the term Wave better. Einstein is coming to mean so many different things that it's becoming a little vague, whereas Wave only means one thing. But that aside, what you want to do is you want to look at these permissions and start with the absolute minimum. Now, what if you just give your user a Wave platform license and do not assign any kind of permission set to that user, do not grant any additional permissions? Then they're going to have no Wave access. That's right, all kids out of the pool. At an absolute minimum, we need to grant them the permission, use Wave Analytics. I'm going to strongly state right here, do not add Wave permissions directly to a profile. Then you will need to ensure that anyone with that profile is always going to have a Wave license. This should be a separate thing. They should have a permission set that grants them the access they need. And at an absolute minimum, they're going to need use Wave Analytics and a Wave platform permission set license. Again, this is not for Sales and Service Wave. We will discuss those permissions separately. So next, let's look at some permissions that you may want to consider giving your users. And again, examine your business need. If you cannot find a legitimate business use why the user is going to need these permissions, don't give them that permission. At the same time, many of these are not particularly destructive, and it would not hurt to give them to users, but it's just kind of contrary to the philosophy. Again, it's always better to get a support ticket because a user does not have sufficient permissions than it is to try and clean up after giving someone admin perms that they are not properly trained to use. So let's take a look at these. First, we have Create Wave Analytics apps. This allows you to create apps in Wave. These are effectively folders. It's kind of a Salesforce-wide concept, is that when we say app, what we're really saying is folder. It's not a particularly destructive permission. One of the main reasons why you don't want to give it to users is that, particularly in a large-scale implementation, this can result in a lot of clutter. It can just clutter up the UI. It's not really going to hurt anything beyond that. What are the possible use cases for why you might want to give users this permission? Well, as a team leader, I want to be able to create and moderate folders to better direct my users to the assets that they're going to need to access. I would argue that, the number of folders that you're probably ever going to want does not warrant giving this permission to users, and they can simply log a ticket with IT or ask an admin to create the folder for them. Again, it's not destructive, but if you don't have a use case for it, don't give out the permission. Next, download Wave Analytics data. There's one very crucial use case where you are not going to want to give this permission out. If your company or your client's company has a policy in place where this is non-compliant, where if you have HIPAA or FERPA data that's being stored in Wave, and your company's compliance policy says we do not permit users to download data, you are going to want to make sure that you do not give this permission to anyone. What is the possible use case for why you would? Well, most commonly, it's that users want you to build them very complex data tables that they can then export into Excel for further modification. I'm kind of against this in the sense that it's contrary to the philosophy of what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to get our users out of Excel and get them into to Einstein and exploring their data that way. So if we give them the means by which to download data and use it in Excel, then really Einstein just becomes a way for them to download data, which is not its purpose, and it does not really work well for trying to generate user adoption, and it's not going to work well for evangelizing your implementation. So is it particularly destructive outside of the compliance issue? Not really. It will likely lead to an increase in support tickets regarding people trying to get larger and larger volumes of data out of their tables and more complex needs for just exactly how they need the data. But that's up to you if you feel that this is something that you want to give users. There are a lot of valid reasons why they might want it, and it's not really the end of the world. I'm going to skip trend data for a minute, and we're going to go to upload external data into Wave Analytics. And this is specifically going to be through either the UI, where you can upload up to half a gig CSV files, or through command line through metadata API tools such as dataset utils, where you're going to have a much higher cap. So dataset utils, I'm actually going to not really worry about here because, frankly, anybody that can use that tool is most likely going to understand the potential ramifications, and it'll be in good hands. But the worst case scenario that can really happen is that users could potentially create large data sets, store them in their private folders, or where you can't really get access to them, and it's still going to count toward your platform-wide row cap. So the other possible negative that it could have is that users keep uploading CSVs to the share folder. It could make it pretty cluttered in there and result in a less than pleasant user interface. But again, just ask yourself, do the users actually need this permission? What data are they trying to load externally? And is it better to just give them, to have a more appropriate process for getting that data into Wave? If there's not a valid use case, don't give out the permission, and then it's just never an issue. Lastly, let's talk about trend report data in Wave Analytics. And first, I do want to say I really like this feature. I think it needs work, but it's got a lot of promise. Then I'm going to say do not give this permission to users without making sure that they know absolutely firmly how it is used and what they can do with it. So imagine this use case. I have a large-scale implementation. We're rolling out Wave to 200-plus users, and we've started by turning on the lights, spinning up Sales and Service Wave, and just encouraging users to get into the interface and to try it out and experiment in the hopes that they will tell us what they like, what they don't. We can better identify our use cases for custom implementation and custom dashboards. This is a really great way to start a project. Just open it up, get the users in there, get them comfortable with it, get them excited. But do not give them this permission unless they know exactly what it does. So now imagine this. Out of your 200 users, 20 of them, and it only takes 20 or so, decide, oh, what does this button do? And they trend a report. And by default, it's going to be capped out at like 200 rows per report. It's going to be capped out at like, I think, 5 million rows for the entire data set driven off that report. 20 users is going to be all it takes to hit that 100 million row cap. Now imagine if you're rolling out to 200 plus users, you're probably buying more than that, and you're going to have a higher row cap. But at the same time, now let's say that this ends up in their private folder where you can't access it. They click the button once. They don't even necessarily know how to get to it. They forget about it. What are you going to do, log in as all 200 users and try to figure out who's chewing up your data cap? I don't think that it's a good idea to give end users the ability to consume a restrictive limit if your admins and your IT personnel do not have a way to access, audit, and manage that. So make sure whoever you're giving this permission to, there are definitely valid use cases for why you might want to give this to users. It's a really cool feature, but make sure that it's kept in the hands of the few. That they don't necessarily have to be admins. But you need to make sure that you're not giving it out all willy-nilly so that if you run into a problem where suddenly you're like, where are all of these rows coming from, you have a short list of users that you're going to have to log in as to check private folders. And you want to make sure that they're very clearly aware of what this feature can do. I'm probably going to do a separate video just on trending. It's got a lot of promise, like I said, but there's also a lot of gotchas and things about it that may not necessarily be the most intuitive. If a user really, really wants this, if only a couple of users really, really want this, might I suggest that you just let someone with admin perms set this up and trend the report that they want. One thing to be aware of, while you can customize the limits associated with trended reports, they do not apply to admins. The docs are a little vague about this, but I have tested myself and can confirm that the rules for number of rows per single snapshot and total number of rows per data set do not apply to admins. So next, these are your admin-only permissions. Do not give either of these permissions to a user who is not fully trained in what it can and cannot do and willing to take responsibility if anything breaks. Edit Wave data flows. Why do you not want to give this to users? Well, because this is literally the spine of your entire implementation. You can break everything from here. You can destroy all of your data from here. You can corrupt every single dashboard from here. Be very careful who you give the keys to. Make sure that it's somebody who knows what they're doing and somebody who's literally the only person who should have this is the person who's in charge of editing and maintaining data flows. Manage Wave Analytics. The number one reason you don't want to give this to users is because it also comes with the delete permission. There's no recycling bin in Wave. Highly recommended that you back up your dashboards and your data flows, your XMDs, all your JSON-based assets should be backed up. That said, no one wants to have to restore from a backup. You're going to have to redo all of your links, and it's a huge pain when a custom dashboard that you put a ton of work into gets deleted. Even if you literally took a backup an hour before it happened, it's still a pain in the butt. Just don't go there. Don't give users the permission. Next off, this is an optional permission set that I actually create every single time. This is called the Wave Integration Extension. Now, the purpose of this permission set is that we assign it to the integration user. The integration user, let's just take a step back and explain the role of the integration user. Wave sits on top of Salesforce. In order for your data flow to digest Salesforce objects and bring that data into Wave, the integration user logs in via API and extracts the data. The Wave integration user's profile needs to have read-only access to anything that you want to be able to digest. So a very common data flow error that you will get when you're first starting off your implementation or when you're trying to expand and add new objects is it's going to say that the field doesn't exist. And the cause of this error is not that the field doesn't exist, it's that the Wave integration user does not have access to it. So typically what you're going to do is you're going to go and you're going to edit the Wave integration user's profile, give them access to the field, and carry on with your day. I'm going to recommend that you actually have a separate permission set for this purpose and that you never modify the integration user's profile directly. It really just helps to compartmentalize and keep track of what permission we have and have not granted to the integration user. It's just nice to keep everything separate and organized. So again, this is completely optional. This is not my suggested best practice, more as my recommended method of conveniently tracking everything. So next, we're going to talk about the license-specific permissions within Wave. This is going to be our Sales and Service Cloud and also our communities. So these permissions basically break down very similarly to all the others. You're going to want to assess the business need and separate out, is this a basic user permission or is this an admin permission? And I do, again, strongly recommend keep these as a separate permission set. Assign your Wave platform users the Wave platform permission set. Assign your Sales Wave users the Sales Wave permission set. And if a user needs to have both, give them both permission sets. Another interesting concept to bring up is the idea of associating a permission set with a particular license, in which case when you assign that permission set, it'll automatically assign the appropriate license to that user. Nice feature that helps you save a step. Only snag is that you cannot migrate if there's a permission set license associated with the permission set, you cannot migrate it from your sandbox to production via a change set. So you'll either need to configure it manually or set up that license-based association after you migrate the permission set. Lastly, communities. Wave for communities is also its own permission set. Permission set license. But this is intended to be given to community users so that you can expose Wave Analytics dashboards on a community, which I think is just an awesome idea. Let's spread it out there. Let's get these things up on our portals. But the problem that we have right now is that this is still a per user per month licensure. So imagine that you're in a higher education institution and you have a portal for your professors to log in, and one of the dashboard, and you want to put up a dashboard there that's going to show how your students are performing versus other students being taught the same course by a different professor. That sounds like a really fun dashboard. Well, the problem is you have this per user per month licensure system. So what if those professors aren't logging in? Or what if this is the sort of dashboard that they really only want to check like a couple of times a semester? You're still paying for it whether they're using it or not. And what I would really love to see happen is if we could go to the login pool strategy that we see on standard community licenses, where you're paying not based on how many people have access, but how frequently access is being used. So you basically have like a set number of hits per month, and you could scale that way. If you're running up to the limit every month, think about expanding it. If you run out of the limit every month, oh no, call Salesforce support and expand your limit. But this way you're not granting access and paying for users who are not necessarily utilizing the tool or who are just underutilizing the tool. So it's not a thing right now. I'm pretty sure that there's an idea up on the Idea Exchange for it. If I can find that one, I will post a link in the description, and if not, I will probably go ahead and create it. I would be really surprised if this was not up there already. So lastly, sharing and security in Wave is its own major topic, and I'm not going to go into depth of every angle, but I feel that there are some few really crucial basics that need to be understood that are appropriate for this video. First off, let's just say that I create a data set of opportunities. I share it with the entire organization. Then I don't implement any kind of security predicate on that data set. And then I have a user who I have granted Wave access to who does not even have read on the opportunity object. We do not want him to be able to see this sort of information. He logs into Wave, he's going to be able to see all of the numbers, all of the everythings on that data set. If we do not set up any security model in Wave, there simply is not a security model in Wave. Don't let that frighten you. Wave does have security. Wave has extremely robust and heavily customizable security, but just there's not an assumption that it doesn't decide what it thinks that your security model should be. It leaves that up to you. And if you do nothing, there is no security. It's just like when you spin up a brand new org, the org-wide default is just set to public. Everybody can see everything, and then you lock it down from there. So let's look at just the 3 categorical types of security that you can apply. I'm just going to skim the surface on these. The first is going to be app-level security, where we do keep all of our data sets open, and we simply choose what folders we are going to grant users access to. What's great about this model is it works very similarly to how report sharing works. I can only see the folders I have access to, and I can only see the assets that are in those folders. It's very quick and easy to spin up. It does not require a ton of work. And the use case where this is ideal is where everything that's in there is pretty safe, and nothing. There's no confidential like patient information. There's nobody's credit cards, social security numbers. Very very just safe and general information. Where like worst case scenario, if you have a leak and the guy from marketing accidentally gets access to the finance dashboards, well, these are all just aggregate numbers that you're going to see on the quarterly all-company slide deck that goes out anyway. It's not that big of a deal. If that's your use case, go ahead. Use folder access to control security. It's going to save you a ton of time in your initial implementation phase. Next, but if you do have that situation where you've got HIPAA compliant data, do not use this model unless everybody can see that data. If there is a concern that a user who has access to folder B should never under any circumstances be allowed to see what's in folder Q, then do not use this model, and you are going to want to implement something more robust. The next stage is just going to be implementing role-based security, where you can either say, I can see what's in my role, or I can see my role and subordinates. This is basically going to take your role level security that's already implemented in Salesforce and just kind of grab that up and say, okay, we're going to use it like that. Sharing rules, not so much. Manual sharings, not so much. You can probably digest those objects. I haven't really tried. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about advanced. If you have large volumes of data coming from external sources and you want a user's ability to see that data to be derived from keys found on that external data, or if you have an extremely complex business model where you're doing a multi-org wave where the different orgs are all different business units within the company, so even though 2 people have the same role, they're from different orgs and shouldn't be able to see each other's data, this, that, and the other, then you're going to want to implement some kind of very complex security predicate per data set. Again, this is its whole own thing. I'm not going to go into depth on that. If your use case is complex, that's the way that you're going to want to go. It's easier than I'm making it sound. If you can write a data flow, if you can mess with SQL queries, I'm sure that you can handle security predicate. It's not the hardest thing that you've probably ever done. So I'm definitely open to suggestions for any videos that people would like to see. What do you like? Do you want to see more tutorials? Do you want to see more best practice videos? So definitely give me some suggestions. Please do that thing that everybody says. Like, subscribe, share this. Hit me up on LinkedIn and endorse me for stubborn determination. I'm trying to get that one up to the top of the list. And as always, thanks for watching.